we were talking about a couple of days ago. Me and Azim wrote to each other because I don't remember how it started. Maybe we were talking about this episode and how it would run out, and then this topic came up of mental health in general and how it's treated in the US. And my first question to him to try to understand what happens in the US is, how come you guys use so much drugs and so quickly and so early stage? Like, we're normally here in Italy, probably, I don't think, unless you're like psychiatrist, so not even a psychologist, you're not even allowed to prescribe drugs for the most common mental health issues such as depression or anxiety. While my gut feeling, and I think Azim confirmed it the other day, is that gets very easily given in the US at very early stages, even without a proper diagnosis. I don't know if this is true. What do you think?
I think we turn to drugs in the US because we view the human mind and body in mechanistic terms. Strong causality, cause and effect. You can take this pill and have it do this particular thing to the brain, but what we don't appreciate is that we're not machines, we're complex systems, and we don't exhibit strong causality. Now, there are exceptions, obviously. Somebody in pain, significant pain, should be given pain medication. But in terms of cognitive function, cognition and consciousness is a emergent property of humans, and I don't think we can treat emergent properties with strong causal means.
Does this mean that you should have a sort of a more holistic approach when curing your patient? And I think that goes beyond mental health. That goes, even when you got a specific type of pain sometimes. But do you think that what you're going towards and what you're saying is that there has to be some sort of more holistic approach to curing mental health?
I think so, definitely. I think a holistic approach should be a part of any treatment. A surgeon should not be holistic. A surgeon should do surgery. But when they're out of surgery, what are some of the activities and rehabilitation exercises planned? Because I bet there's a way to integrate holistic kinds of modalities that would improve the outcomes overall.
Yeah, and by holistic, of course, we mean not necessarily very, very complicated things, but sometimes it's even simply diet, physiotherapy, and maybe a little of mental therapy too, in terms of getting out of an injury or motivation and things like that. So yeah, I think I totally see that, and I think that's in current medicine. This is something I'm missing a lot, especially in Western medicine. I don't find that often. Maybe osteopaths do sometimes have that kind of a holistic approach where they would have ask for an opinion even from a dentist or gastroenterologist in some cases, and they work to build a big picture and try to understand what's going on with your body. While if you go to the specialist, because of the sheer definition of the specialist himself, he's not going to look outside his bubble for the issue, and he's gonna be sort of biased, right, in the research he's gonna do and the investigation. And also, I would also add, so many doctors are not curious enough to actually try to understand what's happening with you. They have stats. They know that 99% of cases someone that has these symptoms is gonna have this specific thing, and so the diagnosis is going to be in most cases based on statistics rather than proper holistic analysis of what you have.
Man, as someone who's an American, though, one thing I have to interject with is that I think as much as we can blame doctors because there's a strange incentive system to prescribing medication that's there, one thing I have definitely seen is that the patients in the United States are very looking for the silver bullet type of people.
Yes.
And so when they go in, they're expecting this is my problem, give me a medicine. Whereas if you told them hey, what might be beneficial to you would be to start practicing some different breath work and meditation every day so that you could potentially help soothe your central nervous system. They would say, no, that's fine. That's cool, but where's my medicine?
Yeah. Yeah, true. I was when I was back in the UK, this thing would happen a lot in the NHS system. So in the UK, you have public health system in the same way you have it in Italy too. You had walk-in doctors compared to Italy, where in Italy you've got a doctor assigned who's going to be for large portions of your life always the same. So he knows what you are, what you have done, what you've taken. He knows all of your history. Especially in small towns, that's even more probable. But even in big cities, it's like that. So you have a doctor in an area that's got assigned a certain number of patients. And with the NHS, what would happen is I've been a lot of times in the doctors for different reasons, and I've been, say, probably out of 4 years walking in there like 10 times and never meeting the same doctor. Because of the way the system works, which I think it's not necessarily an issue. But then the thing would be, when I was explaining what I would have, they would have this clock running and knowing that they would have 5 minutes per patient to build a diagnosis. So their diagnosis would be based on statistics mainly, because it's the quickest way to actually build a diagnosis and then give a therapy immediately after, because they have these objectives. It's very, very well. It's almost like a chain, a factory chain in this sense, which is probably it means that in 99% of cases it will be very accurate and productive. So. Haven't got anything against that, but I agree with Azim. Sometimes it is us going there thinking that we already know what we need, and we've done our Google research and we think we have a tumor, which even with a headache is the case.
Your car can run out of gas, and you could even leave it in an abandoned field for like 10 years, and assuming it doesn't get rusted out, you can start that car up again when you put more fuel in. The same cannot be said for an organism. It's vital to our grand conversation on mental health that activity is everywhere all of the time. And really, to understand this, we have to get rid of the idea that there is a stable sort of being. Everything is change. Change is the only constant when it comes to not only our environment, but our internal environment. The cognitive kinds of activities, the electrical activities that make up our consciousness. It's all going on all the time. And if it were to stop, we would die.
This reminds me of you can dig your feet into the same river twice.
That's exactly where this is coming from. That was Heraclitus back in ancient Greece. I want to say 1400 something, or probably older than that. I'm way off. But yeah, it was Heraclitus. And that appeal to bodies of water in particular, it's called the stream of life conception. And it's one thing that the philosopher John Dupre and Daniel J. Nicholson talk about in their book, A Processual Philosophy of Biology. And that's where I love the textbook. I'm a big fan. I hope to meet him in person one day. But that conception helps to make sense of diachronic form. How a river can expel all of its water. All the water particles that are in a river now, tomorrow will be gone. Yet the river remains. So what is it that has stayed constant here? And what has stayed constant is the activity. It is the change of water, just like that constant activity within an organism, or the constant activity within a business. A challenge that we're seeing right now with the shutdowns of worldwide economies because of COVID. How slow, how close to thermodynamic equilibrium can we bring restaurants and the hospitality industry and yada 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 without causing them some kind of structural failure? How can we manage these systems without the system collapsing?
Okay, so change becomes a vital part of the system, if not an endemic characteristic or feature of the system for it to survive. If we're talking about complex systems.
Absolutely. Change is completely necessary.
and it's chaotic. It's emergent. It's not necessarily something linear.
Yeah, the emergence and the restructuring is an interesting kind of avenue into the mental health question. I think that an effective solution to mental health would... There we go. I think that understanding the structure and function of the human nervous system is necessary if we want to understand mental health. I think that complex adaptive systems theory offers the best analysis tool when we talk about structure and function of a system. And ultimately, when it comes to designing a treatment that employs this kind of an understanding, I think that's going to be the trick to greater efficacy in mental health, because right now the average mental health outcomes across the industry are effective about 40% of the time. And Windows, if we sold you Windows that were effective 40% of the time, I think you would run us out of town.
You're talking about therapies that include drugs, or you're talking about
I'm talking about psychotherapies, but I mean, in theory, if there were a therapy with a drug that could initiate, and this is to a degree what psychedelics do. There's an amazing book called The Science of Connection, I believe, from psychedelic to soul, something like that, by Dr. Judy Holland from New York. She's a psychopharmacologist. And she talks about a deactivating of the, oh God, I'm gonna, Dr. Judy,
what's her name again?
Julie Holland. I just know it by Dr. Holland. But it's essentially a deactivating of one nervous system, a calming down of one nervous system, and an activation and excitement of another nervous system. I believe it's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So it's slowing down the sympathetic nervous system, which is what, I don't want to say that's where we start to feel anxiety, but when we pick up signals from our environment, they get processed through the sub and unconscious, where we filter through series of beliefs. Beliefs, I take it to be like the operating system on a on a computer. Again, I resist mechanistic metaphors, but they are convenient. The sub and unconscious essentially try to say, how do I feel about this thing in my environment? And if you look into polyvagal nerve theory, it talks about this in much greater detail. How do I feel about this stimulus in my environment? And what sort of physiological reaction within me am I going to create? And I use the I, but I'm talking from the sub and unconscious and the nervous system perspective. And the peripheral nervous system is looking for those sorts of threats and responding to them appropriately. The parasympathetic nervous system is what allows us to help build connections with others, to connect in a spiritual, social, loving sort of sense. And I think any sort of, back to the question of, does that therapy include drugs? If there was a pill, if there was a drug that could achieve that same sort of effect safely, I would be all for it. And I think that is what psychedelic research is about, at least as far as Dr. Holland is concerned. I don't remember if she's using ecstasy, MDMA, or if she's using psilocybin. I want to say psilocybin to treat PTSD and depression. And really what it's doing is it's allowing a restructuring of the subunits within the system. And just to make a business analogy, if there's an economic sort of crash like there was in March of 2020, that is a signal, that is a stimulus from the external environment into the internal. One of the great things about complex systems is they possess non-intentional agency by differentiating interior from exterior. And we see that even in non-biological cells. Like you can set up a saline gradient and the action, the activity through the membrane will move towards an equilibrium. And it's a differentiation of self from other. The economy and the nervous system do this in a similar sort of way. They can receive a shock from the external environment reorganize their internal units, their subunits, to be more optimal given the selection pressure. So if it's a temperature base, if there's a wildfire, that's one selection pressure. If there's a blizzard, that's another selection pressure. In the case of humans, we are social primates. Once we got past the stage in our evolution where we were genuinely concerned about, lions, tigers, bears, that sort of stuff, our biggest threat, our biggest selection pressure became sociability. The less you were part of a tribe, the more likely you were for that tribe to disown you, take away your resources, or worse.
Honestly, so what I'm curious about is distilling this down for the everyday layman who doesn't necessarily have a lot of this knowledge. Is I'm curious, like, other than, let's say, taking like a psilocybin and not wanting to take, an SSRI, what are some functional things that people could look into that would help them with some of these issues they face, like an anxiety or just like a overly activated part of their nervous system, in a simple way that they could get into? Because from my personal experience, for instance, like breath work and breathing are a big one. Trying to take a look at and understanding your sleep patterns is a big one. Understanding, are you exercising or moving enough is a big one. But for someone like yourself who is an expert on this, I'd be curious, like for any average person, like where should they start looking if they're like, man, I don't love the fact that I take drugs, or I'm avoiding going to a psychiatrist because I don't want to just be given drugs. Where could they begin?
Great question. I think breath work is a great place to start. And we employ that in our practice here. First, I want to ask you the question, would you agree with the premise that an effective solution to treating an ailment of a complex system would be to encourage some sort of restructuring of the system's internal subunits?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt, what I'd say is it would also require not necessarily just treating the symptoms that I'm experiencing, but trying to understand what it is that has sort of gone awry in the complex system to cause the symptoms.
Okay, right on. So the place that I work at, we provide integrative neurofeedback. And if you've never experienced neurofeedback, what that does is we measure your brain waves using qEEG. We process them through a computer algorithm, and then we feed them back to you in the form of sound. And brain waves are kind of like keys on a piano. There's low tones and there's high tones, and each of them communicate a different sort of internal communication to your system. They are your system communicating with itself about essential functions. So, who's going to do the heartbeat this time? Is the food digesting? Keeping things running smoothly. When an individual hears their nervous system via this brainwave, via neurofeedback, it sounds kind of like nonsense. It sounds like boop, 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 boop. But to the sub and unconscious parts of our brain, to the parts integral to our functioning, and more importantly, to the parts that trigger and operate our fear response, fight, flight, freeze, panic, as well as just kind of our general emotional response, our sensory motor neuron response. To those parts of the brain, the boop, 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 boop makes perfect sense. It takes about 2 to 3 seconds for that part to recognize the pattern as itself. So we're giving the system an opportunity to interact with itself in a way that can restructure those subunits organically. Now, what we're doing in addition is we're doing the cognitive psychological work alongside that to support, because there is no fear response. Those nerves don't fire unless there is a belief on some level that it is appropriate for those nerves to fire. And this goes back to metabolism. The brain is incredibly chintzy when it comes to metabolic energy. It doesn't want to waste a drop. If it believes, or really if it fires in a way that is discordant with your belief, that is a waste of energy. So in addition to changing the brain function and giving the system the opportunity to reorganize, we're working with you on the psychological beliefs about your sense of self, your worthiness, your identity. We're getting to a place where you can identify a little bit more with why your system is reacting this way. And it's almost like talking to a younger version, a slightly less mature version of yourself, because this part evolved in that social primate, pack animal kinds of structure. And that is what the structures of those parts of the brain are optimized for. Now, getting those to change, changing the belief systems along with them, and giving the brain an opportunity to restructure itself are great. One thing that we're doing in addition that helps improve the efficacy is something we call neurofeed forward. Basically, we're taking your brain waves and calculating what they would look like if they were 10% calmer. And we're showing that to you. Your pattern, 10% calmer. Your pattern, 10% calmer. Back and forth until your brain, which again wants to save on energy, tries out that pattern. And it recognizes that it can do the same activity with less energy overall. And it's trying to adopt that pattern in the long run. Please.
So let me try quickly to recap what you said so far to see if I've got it right. So the first phase is sort of an analysis that gets done on my electroencephalogram and brain waves and a psychological evaluation of myself to understand what status I'm in and what status my brain waves are in. So the emotions on one side and the physiological reaction of my body on the other. Then you're feeding me back those same brain waves in sound, and you're trying to hack my brain by making me also hear those same brain waves in a calmer state, hoping that my brain tries to mimic, just by hearing it, tries to mimic that kind of state. And simultaneously, you're also providing with the traditional psychological evaluation and support process.
Yes.
Health treatment. So statistically, what happens? Do you know that compared to traditional, just mental health treatments, psychological treatments, this is increasing the healing process,
yes.
mental healing process.
Ultimately, what this is helping to do is accelerate neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is how your nervous system rearranges those subunits. It's a naturally occurring process. It happens 24/7, just like metabolism. And it's building new connections in the brain to house and to strengthen motor neuron response, and really information. So you put your hand on a hot stove and it's obviously painful. So your hand jerks away faster than your brain can even think about it. Your brain would love to do that with almost all of your life, all of your responses, all of your reactions, to a degree rob you of your agency, and to help you stay alive longer than maybe you would if you had free will.
Okay, because the concept of efficient movement or muscle memory, how we normally call it in sports, is basically based on the same principle, which is you repeat that movement thousands of times to the point that the connections between your brain your brain cells becomes thicker and thicker and thicker, so that there's less dispersion of signal, and that electric signal moves more quickly and more efficiently between one brain cell to the other. Therefore, the instinctive movement is now completely embedded in your DNA. You're saying you're doing the same thing by rewiring basically enhancing the neuroplasticity and the capacity of our brain cells to actually build new connections, therefore favor that change, which we discussed before is so vital for the evolution of a complex system, and in our case, the survival of our and amelioration of
Absolutely.
our mental health.
And I think leaning into change is really part of the solution here. And it gets back to why Americans are so reliant on medications for mental health is that's not leaning into change. The nervous system relies on change. Complex adaptive systems rely on constant movement of resources and exchange of materials to survive, yet they themselves fear change. Because change is... it makes metabolic efficiency challenging. These structures, these organisms, they already know what works for them, for their species, whatever.
Yeah, so those connections are solid, they're thick, but now all of a sudden I teach a new movement, and of course the body doesn't want to learn it because it's triggering brain waves, brain cells that didn't trigger before.
And the thickening of that
at the beginning.
Yes, and the thickening of that myelin sheathing you were talking about with muscle memory in sports, that doesn't just happen with physical movement. That happens with emotional movement as well, with conscious movement. And anybody who seriously practices self-development and gratitude and happiness knows this for a fact, that by practicing those kinds of states of mind, by just like finding things in your day that you can be grateful for, and count 10 of them every day, you're going to build neurons based around the action of being grateful. Just like you would build... Yeah, like this is...
I've never thought about it like that, but you're building the myelin in your brain, firing the neurons in the synapses for gratitude, and so you're going to increase your overall mental well-being through that practice because of myelination occurring, like to strengthen the circuit to be able to fire faster and better, basically.
Exactly. And that's not just gratitude, that's love, acceptance, joy, expectations, not being bothered when your expectations are met, and ultimately, ideally, not forming expectations in the first place.
This is fascinating.
I am so glad, because I know I started off rambling.
This is fascinating. I mean, this is even making me like sort of connect to like what many would consider like sort of the hocus pocus of religion.
Oh yeah.
And people would be like, oh, this is just, like hocus pocus of religion. You can hear that very often. But there's scientific backing to the idea of myelinating those neural circuitry better.
Rituality and the purpose behind rituality. The other thing I'm thinking of is also, it's honestly the easiest way to think about it is, when they tell you the more you smile, the more you get to smile. And it's true. The more you inject and force yourself into specific behaviors, the more you get used to them, and the more natural they become to you.
I think those behaviors... So this kind of gets into the question of intentionality versus behavior, mere behavior. And we are talking about subjective human consciousness here. So that gets sticky in a really good way. Because I think what we consider, and just my theory, I went through this process. I went through a treatment that utilizes these principles. And they did not ever design it to utilize these principles. It was a complete coincidence because they were tracking the structure and function of the nervous system and ultimately the emergent consequences. They were correlating the data between the subjective conscious experience of what it is like to have anxiety, have anger, what have you, depression, PTSD, etc., with the physiological sorts of remnants, because when an individual undergoes trauma, they build neural connections in response to that trauma to make sure essentially that they have a pre-programmed sub and unconscious response that can help defend them in the future. Yeah, I could come up with an example, but I think that does it right there. So you can see it in the brain, and you can sometimes even see when it developed. If it's in a region of the brain that developed when you were, between 15 and 25, there's a good chance that whatever trauma occurred happened in those year range. And then we can further kind of split hairs and see, okay, was it a physical trauma or was it an emotional trauma? What is the reaction that this part of the brain is responsible for? Is it related to some kind of physiological protection aspect? Or if it's the part of the brain that triggers a defensive emotional response, I think that's ultimately defending our psychology, our beliefs, because we don't like when our beliefs are challenged. No.
Oh, nope. I want to go back to a practical example in the case of anxiety, because one thing I'm trying to understand these days, especially in a troubled time like the one we're living at the moment, is the actual difference between anxiety and depression, and if one is the subunit of the other. And then anxiety, how many layers of anxiety can I have? And
so
how
the way I understand the
that?
difference between anxiety and depression is anxiety is an activation. Anxiety excites the nervous system in a way to prepare it for a stimulus. So you hear a loud crashing through the trees. You expect that there's a bear running at you. You get anxiety. Depression, as I understand, is more of a deactivation. The same bear is crashing through the same trees, and you're like, you know what? Honestly, today's the day. Let's do it. As far as the treatment goes, and this is one of the really interesting things, is when you're treating a complex system as a complex system, you can utilize the same approach, no matter the pronunciation, the particulars of the system. And this is part of what makes complex systems theory and just the field in general one of my favorite to talk about, because you can take an analysis for a business and apply it to a biological unit, a cell or an organism. And then you can take that same analysis and talk about astrophysics or sociology. So I love it for that aspect. But underlying underlying depression and anxiety are fears, really, at the end of the day. Because those motor neurons, that relationship in the brain, that trackable patterned phenomena that we can identify as, oh, there goes anxiety or there goes depression, those don't get fired if not for fears. And I do want to say real quick that there are absolutely individuals for whom SSRIs are an excellent treatment.
100%.
100%. There's serotonin reuptake
what's an SSRI?
inhibitor, I believe. Azim, are you more educated on the pharmaceutical side?
I almost went to medical school, but it's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Is like what it stands for, and it's essentially just like blocks. Without getting into it, that's one of the main forms of depression meds or depression and anxiety meds that people go on. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so like Zoloft,
so reduces
or Paxil,
the level of serotonin.
Some of the like very, very popular SSRIs, and it's one of the ones that's most commonly prescribed for it. And there absolutely are people who need to take them, but I'm on the boat where I think way too often we jump to the conclusion that our brain chemistry needs it, and it's become this sort of crutch also, because there are so many people I see who have been taking them for 5 years, 10 years, and just it looks like it's going to be a lifetime medication, and they're still facing some serious issues, but when holistic ideas are mentioned to them, they sort of like laugh at it because they're like, no, but there's no scientific basis for that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that's why this is so interesting to me. It's that there's more of a scientific basis for that.
So my kinds of, coming from a systems background, my feelings when I talk to neurologists or pharmacologists about particular neurotransmitters is that the neurotransmitters perform a function. They are a mechanistic apparatus within this system. And it doesn't matter if it's named serotonin. It doesn't matter if the chemical structure, you know, in another universe, a parallel universe where human bodies formed differently, probably the chemical structure of serotonin would have changed as well. None of that matters. But what would stay constant through those parallel universes is this kind of system structure of mechanisms interacting with a self-reflective system that can observe itself and its environment and incorporate its environment into its internal functionings. Because one of the tenets of systems is also that they're capable of pattern recognition and prediction of where the environment is going to take a turn next. Back to the question. I completely forget the initial question there.
No, we started differentiating anxiety from depression, and that was quite clear. But they're very counterintuitive in terms of feelings. Why would our body hurt itself so much?
Yes.
If it wants to survive.
That is a very tricky question. So again, anxiety is a very motivating feeling. Motivating in the, I have to take some kind of action about this. And that's because our system, our neural network, again, I don't like mechanistic metaphors, but view it kind of like an old computer. And the code is logical. If you give it a 1, it's going to spit out a 0. But what the nervous system is not good at doing is looking at the big picture and providing some perspective and context. And that's one of those things that we have to train it to do through self-betterment, self-development, what have you. And again, this is a consequence of being a complex system, which human beings are organisms we are. In a constant metabolic flow, a constant energy exchange, the chemical potential energy in the breakfast you ate this morning has been rotating through the earth through as long as we've had organic molecules from which to extract potential energy. These parts of us have been around for thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, literally billions of years. We are a very temporary kind of time slice of how these atoms and these molecules within us are existing right now. But in 100,000 years, this same energy, provided it hasn't been lost to entropy, is going to be flowing. And so we get the sensation, the subjective experience that something is wrong right now. But it's because our system can't understand, even in the terms of our own lifetime, that this doesn't matter immediately. I mean, we are privileged human beings, truly, to live in a world where our immediate needs are met. Mm-hmm. Or you and I are, at the very least, privileged to be able to talk through a computer like this. But when you can't get water, when you can't get food and you can't get shelter, anxiety is a very appropriate response for the nervous system. But in an office building, I mean, I live in an apartment, I have a car. For my nervous system to create anxiety when all of my needs are met, I understand the inclination, but ultimately it's an inefficient use of my metabolic energy.
So to train our brains to be less prone to anxiety in our average daily life, would it then be beneficial to impose some suffering to it, so that we could appreciate more?
I think we torture ourselves
when
enough.
We have them, or would that be
honestly
torture?
At the end of the day, this is not victim blaming, 0%, because people who suffer from anxiety and depression are generally wonderful human beings with incredible amounts of compassion for themselves and other people, not for themselves, but for other people like them. But that's the point, that anxiety and compassion is not for themselves, because their operating system, the wiring that's running their body, which the subjective consciousness is just kind of tagging along for the ride, because I believe subjective consciousness is an emergent property of a sufficiently connected neural network. They are torturing themselves. And it does come from an evolutionary kind of place of I'm not doing well enough. That fear, again, back to fear, of either I'm not doing enough, I'm not being enough, I am not enough, is an incredible motivator.
And that's
zero.
FOMO. There's no rational reasoning that can help that. That's why when you have a depressed friend, there's nothing you can say really to help him out, because everything you're gonna say is just, for how rational it might feel to you, his reaction is not rational. So there's no way of understanding it, or
it's not rational.
Understanding the reasoning behind it.
It is logical in the way that the computer kind of logic works, where specific inputs yield specific outputs. And that's where the beliefs come in. That's where the psychology and the neuroscience interact. Because the input can be a stimulus. It can be light passing through the optic nerve, and that light just happens to depict, a T-Rex running at me. That's the input. The belief is that T-Rexes are bad for my survival. They want to kill me. The reaction is the sensory motor neuron response of getting the heck out of Dodge.
Makes sense. I think everyone of us has people close to them with similar problems, and it's just no way of reasoning behind the fact, trying to explain that the T-Rexes don't exist, because to them in that moment, it's something
so imagine
primal
that
that's
the
coming
treatment
from deep
could not
inside.
only affect the reaction, the logical computer logic part of it, of the input to the output.
No, you have to focus on where it's coming from. Like if it's a T-Rex, you have to show them documentaries that show that T-Rexes don't exist anymore. Like that, you have to cure it.
And if that cause is so
that's
deeply ingrained into our epigenetics, I mean, the brain system structures that care about what my coworker thinks about me evolved tens of thousands of years ago. I have those. My father has those. His father passed them down to him. We're really fighting an uphill battle when it comes to transcending some of these animal instincts, because we have trillions of neurons all connected to serve the purpose of making me care what you think about me, and not nearly enough connected pointing to, do I care what I think about myself?
That's how we feel about ourselves.
And you asked you about this in email. Is this just a weird English phenomena, feeling about how we feel? Like, I feel sad about feeling sad. Or is that possible in Italian too? And does that translate into an illogical sentence?
Well, the problem with feeling is that in Italian it translates in something that has the same meaning of listening.
Oh, wow.
So
That's actually really
it makes it
interesting.
even more
Is it?
weird, I think.
I wonder if
frustration.
it's to some degree listening to your feelings.
Kind of. Well, yeah. I mean, listening in terms of sounds, but it's
Wow.
also
I like that.
feelings. So it's how do I feel and how
Wow.
do I hear are
I
translated with the same
appreciate that
right.
in German, you don't say you don't identify with the am. You know, I am sad. You don't say that in German. You would say, ich habe Angst.
Mhm.
I have
Mhm.
anxiety, or I have sadness, or I feel sadness. Ich fühle Angst.
But you really have a lot of words in German
You
that
do.
describe feelings so much in details, right?
Again, I think the interesting part there is the words that describe what it is to have a feeling. The possession of a feeling rather than a feeling consuming us. You know, I am not sad. I feel sadness. I think that's another step on an individual's journey to really accepting their emotions as physiological signals. I know that when I feel anxiety, anger, sadness, etc.,
Mhm,
and I'm not good about catching myself in the moment with it necessarily, but upon reflection, it's much clearer. Being able to recognize those as physiological sensations, which we can respond to using our conscious intellect, using all the things that make us not animals, the love and the compassion part, to our highest possible degree. I think that's where an individual really starts to make long-term change in terms of who they are.
No, honestly, I'm just sort
Tim,
of
do
in
you
a
have any
place
more
where
comments
like
on this?
I want to go read more about this and see how I can get this sound test done on my brain. Oh yeah, that's a great question.
We
Can you do
not.
that remotely too?
We do have a mobile unit, so if you were to fly us over to Italy, we could come visit you and stay, crash on your couch or something.
Mm-hmm.
But no, right now, can I give a quick plug?
Yeah.
Cool. So our company is Pathwaves. We are located in Miami on the edge of the Jackson Memorial Hospital campus, and we excel at treating anxiety, depression, PTSD, ADHD. We help kids with autism. We help old folks with Alzheimer's. And then what I'm most proud of is the work we do with high-functioning adults, people who don't necessarily think they need help, but want to perform from a neurological standpoint optimally.
Okay, I'll put myself in that kind of situation, for instance. One thing I found intriguing in my life experiences, which I think crafted the personality I have today, and I think even psychological strength I have today in some instances, is the having gone through so much change in my life. So people who travel a lot, who lived abroad a lot and had to socialize a lot and interact with many people, are almost accustomed to change, at the point that sometimes the feeling of depression actually comes out of static situations, and you end up having to challenge yourself constantly. Otherwise, you feel like you're stagnating in this swamp, basically, that is life. And the interesting thing there that I was thinking out loud when you were mentioning it, the process before of the neurofeedback process and trying to build these neuroplasticity and stimulate that. Are there exercises that you have gone into suggesting to even healthy adults or even children to sort of form a more less change adverse adult.
To form a less...
Is there any work like that you've done?
Okay.
So with children, is there anything you've done where you're trying to anticipate problems that an adult could have just by stimulating already at an early stage with specific exercises?
I do want to give like Carl Jung and his due credit when it comes to talking about childhood experiences and their effect on adult psychology. Because an adult with anger issues is a child with communication issues, is a child with insecurity issues. One thing that this has taught me is that emotions are cocktails, and they're layered, like a Sex on the Beach or something. What we see and what we taste at the top is fermented by ingredients at the bottom. And when we work with children, in a way, it's almost easier because they are closer to that immediate feeling, to that immediate connection. With adults, you got to peel back decades of onion layers and this gets back to the question about language, how we feel about how we feel feeling. Adults have layers of feeling about how they feel that get stacked up over years, and those feelings get translated into neurons. There's a sensory motor connection made there to reinforce the feeling because their system wants to be stable. It wants to change, like that's how it grows for sure. But as far as entropy and thermodynamic equilibrium go, it wants to be stable so that it can stay far away from thermodynamic equilibrium. Children don't have all of those layers, and their version of far from thermodynamic equilibrium is to more rapidly embrace change. Kids can bounce around from one activity to the next, one classroom to the next, one idea to the next. And their ability to get more out of this program than an individual would expect, it blows me away, truly. I mean, 8-year-olds can come in. And in traditional neurofeedback, they're using a Z-score or an S-Loretta method. And that's like a mega study done back in the 1980s that took like 50,000 Americans and figured out what the average, 10-year-old male brain looks like, or average 30-year-old female brain looks like. Part of my objection there is I think average people are stressed out. Average people do not have really efficient coping mechanisms or strategies. I don't want to be average, and I don't wish that upon anybody else. And it also leans into the idea that you have to be sick or something has to be wrong with you to benefit from neurofeedback. So I don't like that. One of the things they do with kids, and sometimes with adults in traditional neurofeedback, is they'll play a movie and they'll have sensors on your scalp while you're doing it. The more your brainwaves look like the version of brainwaves that they want you to be, the movie will play smoothly. Full color, full sound. Excuse me, I have hiccups. No problems at all. As soon as your brain starts to get distracted or you start not doing, what they're asking you to do, the image on the screen starts to gray. The color fades, the sound fades, it gets staticky. And that is their version of training your brain to be different than it currently is. It doesn't address belief systems. It doesn't address the evolutionary biology and the uphill fight against trillions of neurons that care about what other people think of you. And that works well with kids. And to a certain degree, we still do that with kids because they're not always fully, conscious, present adults. You can't talk to them about deep-seated sorts of fears in the same abstract way. But they nonetheless get the effects. They can interact with their nervous system using this sensory language in almost an intuitive way, kind of like how kids learn technology so fast. And ultimately, if it helps them, if it starts to make them feel better, less weird, less different from others, I think it helps to give them perspective that, adults struggle with this stuff too, and it's okay. And so I love working with kids. I think they're great.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I think we got enough stuff in. It would be very interesting in future to maybe have this conversation also with, speaking of holistic approach and seeing the body as a complex system and not focusing only on brain, but maybe also thinking of, even as I was mentioning earlier, the diet and the physiology of the body, chemistry, and how hormones affect us so much. I think there's so much is so interconnected that I think this conversation will be way more complicated, but also interesting if expanded to other realms of the physical world, in terms of analysis of the physical world and the body and the human body. Definitely. Because you can, in the same way you were mentioning biohacking, there's maybe certain activities and sports that can help incentivize the production of certain hormones, or maybe certain a certain type of food in the same way can help, and all that can contribute to a more holistic approach to mental but also physical health, which, as you mentioned before,
I would invite
anyway.
the opportunity to talk to you guys again anytime. I so much appreciate you finding me on Clubhouse, and then inviting me to come nerd out with you about human evolution, complex systems theory, and how thickly interconnected our world and our webs are.
Yeah, this was awesome.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
All right, everyone.
Thank you so much for your time.